Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast. Before we get into our second segment of today's show, I do want to remind you, as always, to consider making yourselves availed of the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube, as well as our website, gsmcpodcast.net, to better leave your opinions, feedback, input, even tips and donations, which are genuinely appreciated. Just make our show that much better when you contribute to it. So, as always, it's there as an option if you want to get your voice heard on the show throughout its duration. But without further ado, let's jump right into our second segment, one of the first NBA segments of today's show, talking about the teams that now, after the All-Star break has concluded, are going to be true contenders down the stretch to win the Larry O'Brien Trophy. And I've broken them up into 3 tiers because I feel like we know who the clear-cut favorites are. They've separated themselves from the pack, and I feel like the reason why I think the 3 clear-cut favorites are as highly ranked as they are is because they're not panicking. These teams did not actually add that much to the deadline for their respective squads, but I do feel like that just goes to show how confident they are that they can maintain their title favorite status. And then the other contenders made some moves that could potentially bolster their roster and potentially give them optimism that they can also legitimately contend for the title. And then the last tier, the fringe contenders, which really rely on a lot of different things going their way. Without further ado, let's just jump right into it, starting off with the 3 favorites, and I think it's quite clear who they are. It's the Oklahoma City Thunder, the Cleveland Cavaliers, and the Boston Celtics. All 3 teams not necessarily doing much at the deadline. In fact, the only move that the Thunder really made was getting Chet Holmgren back from injury, and that's not even a move. But because of that, it allows them to rotate their lineups, allows them to utilize so many different looks to truly confuse opposing defenses in how they attack you. They're a fantastic team when just Hardenstein's playing. They're a fantastic team when just Chet is playing. They're a fantastic team when both of them are playing. And they're a fantastic team when neither of them is playing. That's just how deep this OKC rotation is. And as long as SGA is playing at a high level himself, this Thunder team can go as far as they like. Then, in Cleveland's terms, and also kind of for Boston's terms, it's also kind of about health because Boston has its fair share of injuries this season, no matter who it is in the rotation. And Cleveland, for the most part, has remained relatively healthy, but it's more about how this depth could be challenged should a major injury befall them. And I'm not wishing that upon them, but Cleveland, to me, certainly feels like a team that's going to have to rely on its core group. And even though that core group is one of the most solid in the entire NBA, one of the most solid starting 5s in the NBA for that matter, I feel like one pratfall, one caveat is that depth. And it's going to be the case for a lot of teams, but I think that the reason why Cleveland can overcome them a little bit more is because that starting 5 makes it so tough on opposing teams. And then in Boston's case, this is just a team that, like I said, is shockingly a bit deeper than I thought it would be, and it just got deeper with the addition of Torrey Craig. In fact, the only quote-unquote major addition that any of the 3 title favorites on my list have personally made. But I do think that the ultimate caveat for Boston is remaining healthy down the stretch. If they don't, that's where the rotation gets messed with a little bit. That's where you're going to have to tinker a little bit more than you would like if you're Joe Mazzulla, and that could spell danger for this squad. But right now, these 3 teams like where they're at. They didn't panic at the deadline. One of them added at the deadline, even though they didn't necessarily need to. But these are the teams looking to win now. And their championship window is firmly open, not just for this season, but potentially for the next 3 to 5 years as well. Then we go down the list, and these are teams that are legitimate contenders, whether they made moves at the trade deadline or not. But I think that they're teams with a little bit more questions than Boston, Cleveland, and OKC. Those are the Los Angeles Lakers, the Houston Rockets, the Denver Nuggets, the Memphis Grizzlies, and the New York Knicks. And a lot of these teams have a little bit more questions to be answered about them. For example, the Lakers. And it feels like the questions are starting to get answered a little bit more in terms of how LeBron and Luka fit. But how does Alex Len fit? Is this team going to give up more points than it can score? Can this squad, especially under J.J. Redick, still a first-year coach, mind you, really start to generate momentum down the stretch with the players they have? Because they invested a lot in Luka, but they basically sold their soul, really, for him. Now they don't have a all-star caliber center like they did in Anthony Davis. And Alex Len's going to be forced into a position where he's going to have to step up immediately. So that's a big, big if for the Lakers down the stretch. Then the Houston Rockets. I really do love this Houston Rockets team. And I like that they're relying on this young core of guys. Jalen Green, Şengün, Amen Thompson, Cameron Whitmore, and then have a veteran presence like Fred VanVleet at the point guard position. But by not adding at the deadline with the assets they had and truly investing and hoping that this young core is going to be enough for you in the Western Conference playoffs is worrying to me. And even though no one expected Houston to be in this position, this far ahead in their rebuild, so to speak, I feel like now that they are, the pressure's even more on them. I feel like the fact that you're confident in this particular roster speaks volumes for what you think the future of this franchise is going to look like. And bless them for it, but I think that at least for this season, when there are so many different ways the Western Conference can shake out, and so many different teams that could appear dead now but get more dangerous down the stretch, Houston standing pat at the deadline worries me, at least if they want to win now. If they want to be that long-term team who builds on the core through the draft and gets that level of coalition and unity that way, then maybe that's good for them. But if you wanted to be a win-now team, then you might have wanted to make a move at the trade deadline. But standing pat isn't all that bad, and that's why I don't necessarily view them as a team that's going to fall out of the contention status entirely. Then the Nuggets, Grizzlies, and Knicks. The same theme for all of them, in my opinion. The health of this team and how their stars play. The Nuggets, it's obvious. If Joker's on, the Nuggets are on. If he's off, they're off. He's the engine of that team. He's the heartbeat of that team. And if Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr. don't pick up the slack, then this ranking could be looking a little bit silly because that's how much Jokic is carrying this team right now. Then Memphis. Ja Morant just needs to stay on the court, stay focused, and also continue to develop that rapport with Jaren Jackson Jr. Because these are two guys at your 1 and 5 spots, this inside-outside duo that could be one of the most dynamic come postseason time. So you want them to maintain that status as much as possible. And the Knicks, obviously you got to love the starting five. In fact, if you look at all the different NBA team starting fives, the New York Knicks would be probably the most eye-popping to you. They just have that much talent. It's about how Tom Thibodeau utilizes that talent, and it's about how that talent produces in the critical moments. Because Cat seemingly has adjusted perfectly to this roster, and Jalen Brunson is playing like perhaps the best point guard in the NBA right now. And then you have these guys like Kyle Bridges and Josh Hart contributing in critical moments as well. But the playoffs is a different animal. And Boston and Cleveland, Yes, you're going to have more questions asked about them than the Knicks because the Knicks have their own thing, and Boston and Cleveland will have a ton more pressure on them to win now. But it all depends on A, the health of this team, and B, how crazy Thibodeau gets with the minutes in the postseason. So, Nuggets, Grizzlies, and Knicks kind of fall into their own pack. I would say the Lakers and Rockets have the most potential out of these quote-unquote legit contenders. But I think that all these teams need to answer some questions for me in the stretch run. And the fringe contenders are all teams that also kind of are banking on a couple things going their way down the stretch, but a little bit more so than, say, a Lakers or Rockets team who I think could make some noise in the Western Conference or Eastern Conference playoffs in the case of a team like the Knicks in the postseason. The Timberwolves, the Mavs, the Clippers, the Pacers, and the Bucks. And I like several of these teams on this list, right? I like the Mavs even though Anthony Davis is out, and if he gets healthy and they make the postseason, they could be a dangerous play-in kind of team. The Clippers have played without Kawhi Leonard, through most of the season, and without him, played fantastically. Norman Powell was a huge contributor, James Harden was a big contributor, and this team is more than the sum of its parts. But you got to have Kawhi healthy for the long run. Then teams like the Timberwolves, Pacers, and Bucks have all kind of regressed to the mean. The Timberwolves lose Cat, a lot of pressure falls on Anthony Edwards' shoulders, and the pickups from that trade in Randall and DiVincenzo are not playing up to the level you expected them to. The Pacers, another team where, Halliburton is not necessarily playing like he did last year, and all the contributors to this team that made them get on that big playoff run are not contributing like they did. And the Bucks, they traded for Kyle Kuzma, but I don't know how much better he's going to be than Chris Middleton. Who knows? So all these fringe contenders really are banking on a little bit more than any of the title favorites or contenders I talked about beforehand. But let me know what you think in the comments below about all these contenders in the NBA and who you think is most likely to lift the Larry O'Brien trophy when it's all said and done. Because coming next week, transfer back to the NFL, talking about an interesting subject here. Now that the Philadelphia Eagles have been crowned the Super Bowl champions, who will their first game of the 2025 NFL season be? We'll be right back after this short break to talk about it.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network.